Happy Father's Day, everyone, and welcome to a Courage Pays Better Than Fear market wrap-up preview for the upcoming week. And let me check my watch. Tomorrow will be June 17th. We have a shortened week this week in the markets because of the Juneteenth holiday on Wednesday. But there will be plenty of opportunities to make money out there as a trader, day trader, swing trader, and we're going to take a look at the broader markets. We'll take a look at some individual tickers to see what's going on and what we can anticipate. And a little something different here. Typically, this video is reserved exclusively for members of my Courage community, but today I'm sharing this with everyone on the YouTube channel so you can get an idea of this weekly video that comes out on Sunday. So hopefully you enjoy it. Check it out, get some insights, ideas about what potentially is going to happen this week. And before we get started, as has been my practice here recently, I put on my chart analysis glasses because this helps me get that deep insight into what's about to happen in the market. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen and let's dig into this upcoming week and what transpired. First, before we do that, let's pull up the economic calendar to take a look at what's coming this week in terms of data. And you can see that there's not a ton of major news out there that's going to drive the markets. Last week, we had CPI and PPI that really pushed things. And actually, I have to change this because we're not on the correct week here. Here we go, June 17th. But there's not a ton of news that's coming out this week. We will get the Empire State Manufacturing Index that comes out tomorrow at 8:30. We do have a good bit of Fed speakers this week. You could see we have 2 tomorrow. We'll get a look at retail sales on Tuesday, which can move the markets a little bit. That just shows again, if you click on this, it'll show the description of what this data is. You can see here, retail sales report in the U.S. provides aggregated measures of sales of retail goods and services over the period of a month, so we can see what the consumer spending habits are. And if we scroll down here, we can see industrial production. We'll get some data there, business inventories, more Fed speakers here on Tuesday. We actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So quite a bit there on Tuesday. And then obviously Wednesday, the market will be closed for Juneteenth. We jump into Thursday. We're going to get building permits. That will move the markets a little bit. We'll get continuing jobless claims, housing starts. So some data related to the housing market. And when we roll into Friday, we will get PMI, which is the composite and the manufacturing. So that will have a little bit of an impact on the market in terms of movement. So, just things you want to be aware of, mindful of, especially the time when they are released. And for instance, this PMI, it's going to come out at 9:45. Well, the market's open at that time, and you're going to see a little bit of movement. So a lot of the data will come out 8:30 a.m., like the inflation report. So you'll see a little bump up or down pre-market. But these data points that are released when the market is live, you could see some pretty wild swings and your stop loss get checked really quickly. So just making sure everybody's aware of that. And we are closing up this round of earnings. We'll move into the next round of earnings in July. And yeah, so that just gives you a preview of what's coming in terms of economic data this week. So as we always do, start by taking a look at the S&P 500 index, and you can see that we made new all-time highs this past week, and that was off of the cooler CPI data. And then you could see that from there, we just kind of held tight in that range. We had an inside candle there on Friday. Decent volume. And what can we expect here? Maybe a little bit of chop sideways, a little bit more of a pullback into the 10 exponential moving average before a move higher. I'm not anticipating a correction anytime soon, being that we had this correction that occurred in April and really bottomed out there towards the end of the month. And it wasn't a full deep correction. If we measure this out just from the highs to the lows there, it's not even 6% on the SPX. So a lot of people are saying that, hey, we need that 10% plus correction before I feel comfortable going long. And I get that, but if you're going to continually wait for that and the market continues to run, you miss out on opportunities. So we will get a correction at some point. I don't know if it's going to be just after having those cool inflation reports. So, we'll see what happens here, but I'm expecting at least some sideways movement and then a push higher here on the S&P. If you go to the Qs, what's crazy about the Qs is all-time highs were made the last 3 days of the week. Again, cooler CPI data and nice candle that came in here on Friday, and this thing just continued to push. And you can see we're above all those moving averages. We're in a strong bullish trend. Again, maybe a little bit of sideways movement, some consolidation, and pull back into the 10, and then grind higher from there. We are overbought on the RSI, and we are seeing volume drop a little bit. So some divergence there, but again, the trend is still bullish. If we go and take a look at the Dow Jones, this is where things really diverge a bit, because you're making new all-time highs on the S&P, you're making new all-time highs on the Qs. But when you look at the DIA, you can see here we had the correction in April that occurred on the S&P and occurred on the Qs as well. Double bottom, push higher, made all-time highs in May, but has dropped, and since then really has been struggling. And this chart looks very similar to IWM, the Russell Shares 2000. We're looking at small caps. So it's interesting that the Dow and the IWM are doing kind of the same thing. And when you look at the Dow and you look at IWM, these are companies that are more sensitive to interest rates. It influences the value and the pricing of their stock. And so until there's greater confidence in the market makers that rates are going to come down, it's going to be tough sledding for these guys to push higher. Now, what's interesting to me looking at the data from this week, and Jerome Powell had his press conference following the FOMC decision to hold rates steady, as they said that they were going to be data dependent. And the dot plot that they released showed that probably only going to be one rate cut this year. But the thing that they've been saying over and over is we're data dependent. And if new data comes in that gives us confidence, then potentially we will cut rates sooner. But what's crazy is off of that cooler CPI, cooler PPI data, and really, if you go back to PCE at the end of May, the last three inflation reports have been encouraging. And not that they're amazing, but they are showing progress after some hot reports that came in earlier. And so what I'm trying to reconcile and figure out is why we're not getting at least some bit of a push here on IWM and on the Dow. And what is it going to take in order for that to happen? And so what I'm really watching here is this low that we put in toward the end of April. If I just draw a trend line here, this is recent. And so I'm looking for this. If we're just making a newer trend line here, if this bounces, right, are we going to get a bounce out of here? Or are we going to push higher? And you can see that we have this bearish trend line that's every time it tries to push higher, the IWM tries to push higher, it's failing and getting rejected. And so we'll see if pressure continues to build within these trend lines. And then if we could push out of this with a strong close, then potentially this thing could start moving higher and pushing. And you can see that we're quite a ways away from the all-time high, 244.36. But this is it's all dependent on rate cuts. If you go back to when this thing peaked November of 2021, and it came down following that. And that's because that's when inflation was crazy and the Fed started their rate hike cycle. And it's really just been channeling since then. Now, we did put in some recent highs here. They're not all-time highs, but for the IWM and where it's been, we could see that it is trying to push. But I'm wondering if, after having time to digest the inflation reports, to digest the news, if we see a push out of this and we could clear that upper resistance in that trend line, and we could start pushing higher and maybe trying to grind towards the all-time highs. Now, I don't think that'll be something that happens anytime soon. That would probably be towards the end of this year if we do, but it's crazy. This bull market has been driven by big tech. The Qs have been driving this up, and really Nvidia and the chip sector is pushing this rally. And you have to wonder what would happen if you get small caps participating, and what that would do, what we would see just in terms of this bull run. So something I'm watching, just curious about the reason why it's just kind of stagnant and it's dropping. And so I'm looking to see if this is a new trend line that's established as a bouncing point. And we'll see if we get a bump here on Monday. I know I'm watching this very closely to see how we open. And yeah, so just keeping an eye on that. TLT. Members have seen that I had this upper trend line that was serving as resistance here. We got a close above it. We came back down, retested on that 50 SMA and bounced, and now we're above that. And you could see that we're above all the moving averages on the daily. The only things that are above us is we could see we have the 100 SMA on the weekly, and we do have, some longer term moving averages, the 200 SMA on the monthly, the 200 on the weekly, the 100 on the monthly. But there is some room for TLT to push higher. Now, this is not going to be a fast mover, but you could see that this thing peaked out recently here back in December at $100.49. I wouldn't be surprised to see that continue to push, but definitely going to watch it as it gets near that 100 SMA on the weekly to see if there is a bit of a rejection. But there's definitely some opportunity here for this thing to continue to push higher. If we take a look at the VIX, we could see that the volatility is low right now. It was up as those inflation reports were getting ready to roll out. But again, low volatility is good for equities and stocks for it to push higher. So that's always good to see. And then if we go look at crude oil, so I always try to pay attention to this to give me an edge in terms of how I'm going to trade ExxonMobil or Chevron. I had this head and shoulders pattern drawn out, and it looked like we were getting ready to start to come down, but we have since bounced. And, I'll be watching this to see if this is just a little bit of a retest, bounces or gets rejected off the 100 and 200 on the daily, and if it starts to come back down. So keeping an eye on that to see how that plays out. So it's just an overall look at the broader markets. Again, primary trend overall, we're bullish. I'm expecting continuation on that this week. Not expecting a correction right away. Eventually, we'll get some type of correction here. Who knows when? Maybe August, September sometime. But for now, I'm expecting just to grind sideways and then push higher. So let's just get into some individual tickers here to take a look at. So looking at SMCI, we could see that this upper trend line here has served as resistance. I had a trend line that I was watching for the longest time that was broken back on May 15th. And, we consolidated around there. We came down. We do have some support that was formed off of this hammer here on April 22nd. We're making higher lows. And what I'm looking for now is this newer upper trend line. If we base that off of the all-time high and this high on this candle here on May 23rd, when we got up to 967.39, if we can get a close above this, then potentially we could start pushing up into the thousands again. And you could see some of these headlines down here. I'll pull this up. Super Micro could be the next to join the NASDAQ 100. We know that whenever SMCI starts running, it runs pretty powerfully. And, if that is something that's announced soon, you'll probably see one of those big $150, $200 days that just seemed to be happening like crazy back in January and February with the stock. So this is definitely one that I'm watching very closely. Nice big candle that we had here on Thursday, and then we had an inside candle on Friday. So things could be set up for a bullish pop here on SMCI on Monday. So keep an eye on that one. If we go over to Netflix, you can see Netflix in its all-time high, $702.06. And we got a nice, strong bullish candle that came in here. Basically, any bears who've tried to push this thing down are trapped. And so we should get some continuation here. And basically what I'm watching for here on Netflix is to just push up into that 700 mark. And then at that point, we'll get a little bit of a correction pullback. We did have that nice big gap down over earnings that happened in April, a little bit of consolidation right there on the 100 SMA as it pushed higher. And so going to be watching this one closely. 2 bullish days in a row. But again, a lot of bears are trapped, so I could see a little push higher tomorrow and then maybe just some sideways movement, and we grind up to that 700 mark, and then we start that little bit of a pullback correction there. Tesla. So, yeah, I mean, the shareholder package got approved. Elon's pay package got approved. What else? The relocation of the company from Delaware to Texas was approved. Now, there is discussion that the Delaware judge has to look over this approval from shareholders one more time, and there's a chance that it could get shot down. I don't foresee that happening, but the uncertainty that was associated with that vote has now been pulled out of the Tesla stock, and we should see a move here. But what's crazy is when Elon announced on X that, hey, preliminary results are showing that the package is going to be passed, there was a pop post-market overnight trading, and it did hit a high of 190.89, but then you can see what happened. That thing just sold right back down. And Friday, same thing, sold down and it got into the 178s. And so this thing has just been moving sideways ever since it gapped up on earnings, and it wasn't great earnings, right? It's all based on autonomous driving, the robo-taxis, Optimus, the humanoid robots. And you could see there for a while that the 100 was serving as a resistance point, and we did gap above that on the news. And we stayed above it for the first time in a long time. You have to go back to, let's see, the last time this thing was above the 100, so it was January 2nd. And then Friday, what happened? We came back down and we closed below that 100 again. Now you can see how this lower wick touched the 10, it bounced. It's got to get a push, and it still hasn't filled this gap from earnings back in the end of January. So that's got to happen at some point, right? And a lot of people were talking about this being an inverted head and shoulders pattern here. You can see right there, and that this thing should go higher, that this is maybe just a little bit of a retest of the neckline before bumping. So we'll see here. And if you look at this on the weekly, I mean, you could just see the pressure building, right? It's just in a straight line. And so Tesla's got to make a move out of here, or it's going to drop, right? I mean, it's big nothing burger here. So watching this one closely for a push. There is a lot of junk above it in terms of moving averages. That's going to make it quite difficult for it to push higher. And we do have earnings that'll be coming up for it July 17th. So kind of closing in on that. But you would think that you'd see a push this coming week if there's going to be one higher, fill that gap, and just start to grind higher this summer on Tesla. Or if not, if that doesn't happen and we start coming back down, you can see there's not a lot holding this thing up. We're at the 100 on the daily. You've got the 50 here, but if it gets below that, there's nothing until you come down to the 100 SMA on the monthly. So just keeping an eye on that one. Nvidia, I mean, what do you say about Nvidia? This thing just continues to pump, made a new all-time high on Friday after the split. And, I did pick up some shares, but what I'm looking for is a nice pullback into its previous all-time highs that it made back in March of this year. And when it does come down here, if it does, because this thing has been so strong, then I'll be a buyer at this point. So, I'm a long-term investor on this now. I'm not going to day trade it anymore. I'm not going to swing trade it. I'm just buying and accumulating shares and holding. And that's all I'm doing because I am not betting against Nvidia. And yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about this chart. If you just zoom out and look at this run that it's been on, I mean, that's crazy, right? But we will get a pullback. It's just not going to keep going straight up. And so if we can get that nice dip down here to 97.49 or 97s, I will be a buyer at that point. Roku, I mean, if you watch the Traders podcast, I do an update on Roku every episode, so I'm not going to get into this here. You can go back and check out this past week's episode, but we did make lower lows, which that hasn't happened on Roku in quite some time, right? We were making higher lows, and we got saved here. We almost did, but then this drop here took out that previous low, and you would think that we're going to come on down. And I have this marked as a support that can't break, this 51.66. If this gets taken out, then we're going to start talking about 40s and 30s, which is just, this blows my mind, because it's just been so beat up since its last earnings. The only thing that if I'm giving a case for the bulls here, is if you go back to last July, there was a decent push on Roku on its earnings. It did get up into the 98s. So maybe that's something that can be anticipated here, that we'll get a push up on this next earnings, because the last two earnings have been garbage. And this stock, its chart looks like garbage right now. So, yeah, I mean, until we see some signs that this thing is going to bounce, just kind of, I would stay away from it. There's not really much you want to do with this one. Apple, man, I mean, what a candle. This one, shaved top, Maribozu just smashed higher. And that was following their conference that they do about their new products. They talked about their Apple Intelligence, and it looked like it was going to be a sell the news event here, because when that event happened, Apple did sell off. But then that next day, man, it just took off, and it did hit an all-time high of $220.27. A little bit of a pullback, but look at all this bullish volume that came in with these two candles here. That shows that there is reliability in that price. This is just a nice little pullback. This is profit taking, and so there could be some more room left here to go for Apple. Yes, we are overbought on the RSI, but gonna be watching this one, because this thing definitely can push. And kudos to everybody who wasn't afraid and bought down here, the 169 mark. And it's so funny too. Whenever stocks are selling off like this, everybody's talking, oh my God, Apple is terrible. It can't compete with the Nvidias, the Microsofts anymore. It's whatever. It's a garbage stock. But it's Apple, right? It's Apple. If you had conviction here and belief in the company, you knew that this bounce was coming. It gapped up on earnings. And those of you who traded this, got in on a swing trade, or have been day trading it, good for you. So definitely a nice move there. Let's take a look at ExxonMobil. So following its pattern of what it has done historically, anytime it hits that all-time high, it drops. And what did it do after it hit an all-time high here? It dropped again. And now we're finding a little bit of support at that 200 SMA on the daily. Next stop will be that 100 SMA on the weekly. But if you go back and just historically look at what it does, you could see those areas where it pulls back to, when it corrects. And, you know, here, a lot of choppiness, junk in here. So that 105 would be a good mark if you're looking to go short. If you wait for a little bit of a retest, maybe it comes back down into this range and retest that double bottom about 102. Or if you're really bearish on oil right now, maybe you could see it coming down to that 95 mark, that low that it put in on its most recent pullback. And so, you know, I'll be watching this one. I have this upper trend line here that if it does pull up and bounce, then I'd look to short it at this point. But for me right now, there's just not the risk versus reward. So just going to keep an eye on that one. AMD is an interesting one. Ever since it hit the all-time high back in March, it's just been bleh, right? Dropped after it made this double bottom here on the 200. I thought, hey, there's an opportunity here. And it's just been kind of clustering, chopping sideways. This day here, May 28th, I did day trade AMD here, made a nice profit. And I thought, hey, we're above all the moving averages. This thing's going to go, but it hasn't. And so this, just looking at this chart, this could be pressure building, right? You've got the 100 here, you've got the 50, the 10 sitting there, and it's kind of sticking to that 50. And maybe we're getting ready for a push higher. And if it can get a nice close up above that 100, there's nothing above it to hold it back. But this thing is taking a backseat to NVIDIA in terms of chips. And so I'm not ready to get in on a massive position on this. I'll look for a day trade. But I want to see it over the 10 EMA before I'd look to take it. And then I would hit profit up there around 171 at that 100. But this could be a play that does make a decent move. Not saying it's going to go back up to that all-time high, but I think it could get back into that 200 mark pretty easily because it's been beat up. And also notice too that, you know, the bearish volume peaked out here on March 8th, and it has been declining since then. So maybe the bears are getting exhausted here on AMD, and maybe we were going to get a bounce higher. Meta. I love trading Meta, and I think this one might be gearing up for another push higher. You had the big old gap down, and it was saved by the 100. I mean, that's beautiful, beautiful price action there, and just shows the power of those moving averages. Same thing here. It did push down, but the 100 EMA saved it, and now we're going higher. Have this little trend line drawn here where you could see that it's rejected. This was the all-time high. So I'm watching for a close above this. And, you know, this is price discovery because it hasn't been up here before, but I could easily see Meta hitting $600 by November. You know, I wouldn't get into a swing trade on this one, but, you know, if we get a decent enough of a pullback or just a nice setup here, I would maybe look for some bullish plays with call options. If I get a nice pullback on a down day, get some calls pretty cheap, but I do think there is room here. And Meta's been a little quiet since that gap down on earnings. It's just been floating sideways. We have been getting a push. We got back up into the 500s, but I think this one could be one to keep an eye on here over the next couple of weeks. Let's see here. Microsoft. So this thing has just been pushing. New all-time highs made. I was looking at this as tweezer tops as a potential reversal, but then you had more buying come in on Friday. I'm not looking to take this long. I mean, you're making all-time highs. If anything, you're going to see some profit taking. Maybe this thing pulls back into the 10. But you did have a nice dip back into almost at the 200 SMA on the daily. And kudos to the people who bought here at 388 and have rode this thing up here to all-time highs. But, you know, I don't want to mess with anything that's at an all-time higher. I look for a short if we get some change in market conditions. But yeah, all-time highs look strong, but not enough opportunity there for me to want to take this thing. And let me see if there's anything else that I want to take a look at here on charts. No. Okay. And then Boeing, beat up Boeing. We've got a nice little trend line that's been established here after it hit that 200 SMA on the monthly. And maybe that was the bottom, 159.70, but you could see we've been making higher lows, and we had a bounce off of that trend line on Friday. And so I'm watching to see what happens on Monday if we start to push higher, and that will give some credibility to this trend line. But again, kind of like Tesla, this stock is beat up pretty significantly. I mean, obviously, with all the news out surrounding Boeing, it makes sense. But I would expect a bounce here, and just again, a lot of trash in the way in terms of moving averages. So it's got a lot of fighting to do. We can see when it got over the 100 here, it got rejected, it failed, and now it's back at that bouncing point. We'll see if it could push above that. Marathon Digital Holdings. This one's interesting. Bitcoin to me has been interesting recently, but we're just seeing pressure building here. This thing did gap down. It was raging there back in February, and then earnings here, it hit a high of 34, and that just started this downward spiral. Hit a recent low here back in April, and this is where this trend line that I identified really was established, making higher lows, and then it's been consolidating, sitting on that 50 and in between the 10 and the 100. So you could see all these upper wicks coming in here. So the bears had just been smacking this thing down every time it tries to make a run. But if you can get a nice, big, strong close and take out all these wicks and these bears, then we could potentially start pushing back up into 25, 26, 28s, maybe even to the 30s. But that's all going to depend on what's happening with Bitcoin, which, I'm expecting this thing to just take off, but it hasn't. Bullish day yesterday on Saturday, not a ton of volume, obviously on the weekends with crypto, but in between the 50 and the 100, and this thing's got to go. Because if we just look down below it, you have the 100 EMA here on the daily, but there's quite a ways away for this to drop if it wants to. And it did hit a low here down at the 200 SMA on the daily back when that Israeli-Iranian conflict was happening. I don't think that's going to happen. You could say that this is a little bit of a double top. You have this upper trend line that's been serving as a resistance that it's got to break over if it's going to push. So kind of a do or die point for Bitcoin to see, hey, are we going to start pushing higher, or are we going to come down and correct even more? And maybe it needs to do that. It needs to hit that 200 again before it starts to push higher. I don't know. Some people say that Bitcoin is a bit of a precursor for what's going to happen with equities. I'm not sure, but I think how Mara runs is going to be dependent somewhat on what happens with Bitcoin. So just keeping an eye on that. And then finally, Hershey, I have a long-term investment on this. I love the company. This is where, I invest for my kids. And we've just been channeling. We've been moving sideways. And, this high that we made May of 2023, 276, we haven't sniffed that at all. But we did make recent higher highs, or a recent high of 211.91 back in May 14th. But you can see once that happened, this thing just has come down. Now, if we draw a little bit of a trend line here, we could see that this has been established. We are trying to make higher lows. We broke down below that trend line here, but this week is going to be interesting. So a lot of charts are kind of at inflection points where we're going to see whether there's a change in the trend, or we're going to continue to go lower. And so definitely watching Hershey to see if we get a bounce here. But we're below all those moving averages, and there's nothing except the 100 down here to hold this thing up. The most recent low, 178.76. We start pushing back down into here, I'll start adding some shares to my long-term position. But cocoa prices, I know, were crazily high, insanely high. I don't know if they still are and if that's impacting the price of Hershey. But yeah, just kind of sideways movement here. This is, like I said, this is a long-term investment for me that I'm holding for a significant period of time. And so I'll keep an eye on that. And then I'll pull up here. You can see I have the meme stocks, Roaring Kitty, I think he exercised or sold some of his calls, or sold his calls and then purchased more shares. And they tried to have their shareholders meeting on Friday, and I guess there were some errors with the service they were trying to use for the webinar, and so it was postponed to tomorrow at 4 p.m. And there's rumors that Kitty is going to join the board, and what that potentially can do for the stock. And if we're looking at this, I mean, it's holding its own here. It's kind of hovering between that 23, 28, 30 range. The high that it made whenever Kitty started tweeting back in May, 64.78. I think it hit the 80s in pre-market, but this thing is holding pretty steady. And you are seeing a decline in the bear volume. And so, the buyers, the apes are trying to force that short squeeze. Will it happen? Will tomorrow be the catalyst? Who knows? But it's been fun to watch that saga play out over the last few weeks, and that would be crazy and just a unique turn of events if, in fact, he does join the board. So that is going to do it for the market review and preview for this coming week. Take off the chart analysis glasses. Hopefully you enjoyed what I had to offer here today. And, whatever I'm doing with my day trades this week, I'm going to be quick. Going to be watching SMCI. I think there's an opportunity there, watching that upper trend line. We'll be watching AMD to see if there's an opportunity there. In Meta, I think Meta has some opportunity to the upside, so I'll be watching those three for day trades this week. And then the other thing I'm watching too is Boeing. I want to see if it's going to bounce off that trend line that's been established, to see what happens with Hershey there. But it should be a fun week. Looking forward to it. Don't forget the markets are closed on Wednesday, and hopefully you enjoy this. Like I said, this is a video that I do for my members on a weekly basis, but I'm sharing it with everybody to take a look at what we do. And have a great week trading. And members, I will see you back here next week for another market review and preview. Have a great day, everyone.